First of all, with your permission, ECPS will record this workshop, and later it will be available on our YouTube channel. So welcome to the seventh session of the ECPS virtual workshop series titled We, the People and the Future of Democracy, Interdisciplinary Approaches. This online series follows ECPS in-person conference at Oxford University on July 1 and 3, 2025, and continues the vital discussions initiated there. My name is Reka Koleszar. I'm a PhD student at National Chengchi University in Taipei, and I'm currently interning with ECPS. This virtual workshop series is curated to address one of the most pressing questions of our time: how the idea of the people shapes the fate of democracy. By examining how the people can serve as both sword and shield, namely a democratic force and a tool of authoritarian consolidation, this series fosters interdisciplinary dialogue to better understand democratic backsliding, resilience, and the future of democracy worldwide. Today, we convene the seventh session of our series titled Rethinking Representation in an Age of Populism. This session brings together scholars whose work probes the evolving tensions between populist politics and representative democracy. The panel explores how contemporary populist actors from the right and the left seek to redefine who speaks for the people, how legitimacy is claimed, and how institutional norms are disrupted or strategically reshaped. By drawing on cases across Europe, Latin America, and the broader global South, this session illuminates the complex and increasingly fragile terrain of representation in an age marked by populism, polarization, digital fragmentation, and democratic strain. As a testament to our commitment to knowledge dissemination, ECPS is going to write a report and share the video recording of this event. And with this, I will introduce our distinguished moderator, presenters, and the discussants for today's session. Today's workshop is going to be moderated by Dr. Christopher Magno, who is an associate professor in the Department of Justice Studies and Human Services at Gannon University. He holds a PhD in criminal justice from Indiana University, Bloomington, with research focus on criminology, spatial justice, and state violence. His work examines the epidemiology of violence, the intersection of crime and politics, and the criminalization of poverty and race. He also coined the term criminal populism to describe how politicians exploit crime as a political capital. Dr. Magno has served as a research fellow at Philippine Normal University and a visiting research associate at the Ateneo de Manila University. Our first speaker today will be Dr. Gabriel Bayari-Toscano, presenting on the topic of memetic communication and populist discourse, decoding the visual language of political polarization. Dr. Bayari-Toscano is an associate professor in the Department of Audiovisual Communication at the Rey Juan Carlos University. He is an interdisciplinary researcher working at the intersection of communication and social sciences. His research focuses on the so-called far right and the current polarized discourses in the public sphere. In recent years, he has worked in European and Latin American contexts. Our second presenter of today will be Maria Giorgia Carecini on the topic Populism and the Evolution of Popular Sovereignty, a long-term theoretical perspective. Ms. Carecini is a PhD candidate in the history of political thought at Guglielmo Marconi University of Rome and a contract researcher at the Institute of Political Studies, San Pio. Her research interests focus on political theory, particularly democratic theory, and the history of concepts in political and democratic lexicon. Our third presenter will be Elif Pasek-Erdem, who will discuss the paper Beyond Fairness, Meritocracy, the Limits of Representation, and the Politics of Populism. Ms. Erdem is a PhD candidate in political science at Loughborough University, specializing in political theory and data science. Her research explores the intersection of meritocracy, populism, and democratic representation, with a particular focus on how meritocratic ideals legitimize inequalities and depoliticize social struggles. Her broader interests include democratic theory, refugee rights, and the philosophy of education. So following the presentations, our discussants, Dr. Sanna van Oosten and Dr. Thibaut Dauphin, will each offer 15 minutes of commentary and feedback. Dr. Sanna van Oosten is a postdoctoral researcher at the University of Oxford, where she is involved in the Equal Strength Project. This project explores the cumulative and structural forms of discrimination faced by ethnic, racial, and religious minorities in Europe, with a particular focus on Muslims, Roma, and Black minorities. Her work examines how prejudice and hate crimes accumulate across different life domains and generations, as well as the intersection of race, ethnicity, and religion with other forms of inequality, such as gender, sexual orientation, and immigration status. Dr. Thibault Dauphin is a political scientist and a researcher at the Montesquieu Research Institute and at the CNRS Research Unit at the University of Corsica. He has been certified by the National Council of Universities to serve as a lecturer in political science and philosophy. A specialist in political ideas, particularly the Enlightenment and Voltaire, to whom he devoted his doctoral thesis. He now focuses on republicanism, revolutions, sovereignty, and secularism, exploring the connections between modern thought and contemporary aporias. So as a reminder, we will have a Q&A session after the completion of the presentations and the feedback from the discussants. The participants can write their questions in the chat box or raise their virtual hands and pose their questions in person. So, and with this, I give the floor to Chris.
Hi, everyone. Good morning here in the US, in Erie, Pennsylvania. Thank you to the European Center for Populism Studies for hosting this important interdisciplinary workshop. And thank you to all the participants joining us from different parts of the world. It is an honor to serve as chair for Session 7, Rethinking Representation in an Age of Populism. Today's session brings together 3 insightful papers that approach the crisis of democratic representation from distinct yet deeply complementary perspectives: political theory, digital communication, and the sociology of knowledge. As I introduce our discussion, my aim is to highlight the conceptual terrain that unites these contributions and to frame the broader questions they invite us to consider. Across democracies today, we are witnessing profound stress on the institution, norms, and expectation associated with political representation. Populist leaders continue to mobilize claim to speak in the name of the people, often setting themselves against courts, media, bureaucracies, and even parliaments. Meanwhile, citizens across the political spectrum express declining trust in parties, widening epistemic divides, and frustrations with the perceived distance between decision makers and everyday life. This moment, the scholars, our speakers, has invited us to revisit fundamental questions. Who and what is represented in contemporary democracies? What counts as legitimate political knowledge? How is the people constructed, symbolically and institutionally? And how do new forms of communication transform these dynamics? The 3 papers today help us think about these questions from different but mutually reinforcing angles. Together, they provide a multi-layered understanding of how populism not only challenges representation, but also reveals its structural tensions. The first paper, by Gabriel Bayari, shifts our focus from structure and institution to the world of images, emotion, and digital culture. While Ordem looks at meritocracy and injustice, Bayari asks how politics now travels through memes, short videos, and AI-generated images, especially in far-right populist movements in Latin America. She introduced the idea of mimetic violence. By this, she means that memes are not jokes or light entertainment. They do serious political work. They turn complex conflicts into simple moral oppositions. They normalize aggressions and hostility by wrapping them in humor. They represent leaders as heroic saviors or warriors, like Trump or criminal, and they create felt truths and that spread much faster than careful factual argument. Bayari's analysis is especially important in the age of generative AI. Today, digital platforms and AI tools allow ordinary supporters not only professional strategies to create and circulate powerful political images. In this sense, the crisis of representation is also a crisis of narrative authority. Traditional institutions, parties, parliaments, even mainstream media no longer control the stories and symbols through which people see politics. Populist movements, as she's going to show us, flourish in this environment. They build tight, emotionally charged communities around shared memes and images. Communities bound together by grievance, identity, and a strong sense of belonging. The second paper by Maria Giorgia Carisseni take us into the deeper historical and theoretical roots of this tension by placing populism within the long story of popular sovereignty. She invites us to think in terms of two main traditions. First, there is a monist view of popular sovereignty associated with Rousseau, where the people is imagined as a single unified general will. Second, there is a pluralist view associated with Madison, which insists that popular power must be limited and organized through constitution, check and balances, and protections for minorities. Seen through this lens, populism reviews the monist idea of the people. It tries to fuse the will of one part of society with the will of the whole. That helps explain why populist leaders so often clash with courts, parties, and independent institutions. These conflicts are not always simply anti-democratic impulses. They can also be understood as attempts to sweep away institutional barriers that, in their view, block the true majority will. Carisseni's key message is that populism is not a strange anomaly sitting outside democracy. It is a recurring possibility within democratic life. It tends to resurface whenever the tension between majority rule and protections of minorities become especially sharp. In this way, her paper helped us see populism as a structural features of democracy's evolution, not just a short-term reaction to today's crisis. Paper 3 by Elif Bakshak Erdem asks us to see populism not as an irrational pathology, but as a response to deep structural failures with neoliberal meritocracy. Her key idea, epistemic misrecognition, is that technocratic and credential-based institutions do more than simply rank or sort people. They actively devalue and dismiss entire way of knowing. This produces a strong sense of exclusion and injury among those without credentials, whose reasoning and ways of speaking are treated as inferior or simply not valid. This analysis pushes us to consider representation not only as institutional design, but also as an epistemic relationship. Who is recognized as a legitimate political subject, whose knowledge is valued within democratic discourse. How do certain speech styles come to be seen as unreasonable, uninformed, or populist, and who gets to decide? Erdem brings together Nancy Fraser and Ernesto Laclau to show that when redistribution, recognition, and representation break down simultaneously, they produce demands that cannot be accommodated within technocratic politics. Populism emerges then not as a distortion of democracy, but as a return of the political challenging the boundaries of who gets to speak and be heard. Bringing these three papers together, we can see that they offer us three different lenses on the crisis of representation. From Elif Bakshak Erdem's paper, we get a structural lens on populism, grounded in the failures of meritocratic order. She shows how breakdown in redistribution, recognition, and representation are held together by what she calls epistemic misrecognition, a process through which technocratic and credential-based institutions actively disqualify the reasoning and claims of the uncredentials, rendering their grievances unintelligible within the dominant language of democratic politics. From Gabrielle Bayari, we gain a cultural and communicative lens. Her work on memes and digital images shows how online ecosystems reshape political identities and antagonism. Representation becomes more emotional and more visual and more participatory, but also more polarized and often more hostile. From Maria Giorgia Carasini, we receive a conceptual historical lens. She will remind us that populism is rooted in long-standing debates about popular sovereignty. It revives a monist understanding of the people, pushing against pluralist constitutional limits and reopening old tensions between majority power and minority protections. Taken together, these three perspectives suggest that the crisis of representation is structural, cultural, and conceptual at the same time. It cannot be reduced simply to economic grievances or to the rise of social media or to the constitutional design alone. Rather, it emerges from the interaction of all three dimensions. As we move into presentations, I'd like to invite us to keep a few broader questions in mind. How do different forms of exclusion, economic, symbolic, and epistemic combine to generate populist demands? What new models of representations are emerging in an age of memes, influencers, and AI-generated images? Can democratic institutions reconcile popular sovereignty with pluralism in ways that avoid both technocratic distance and unchecked majoritarianism? And ultimately, what does it mean to represent the people today, when the very idea of the people is so contested, fragmented, and actively constructed? With this reflection, I am delighted to begin our session with Maria. With Gabriel Toscano. Go ahead, Gabriel.
Mhm. Okay, so can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you so much. Just a short question. How much time do we have? Was like 10 minutes or
You have 15 minutes.
10 minutes, right?
Oh, 10.
Oh, 10. Okay, perfect.
Okay.
Gabriel, 15 minutes. I think you misunderstood. 15 minutes.
Perfect.
Yeah, you have 15 minutes.
Perfect.
You can share
Perfect. Thank you.
PPT also.
Thank you so much. I'm going to share my, yeah, just a second. Mm. Okay, so good afternoon, and thank you to the European Center for Populism Studies, and yeah, for all people who have organized this great event, Professor Bullen Keynes, and all of you. I really appreciate your reading and all the work that you are doing. So my name is Gabriel Bayari. Thank you so much for the presentation. And in this work, I will share findings from my Newton International Fellowship that was postdoc with the Uni of London, financed by the British Academy. And today, I would like to present a study that speaks directly, as was already like presented, to one of the central challenges in contemporary populism research. That's how far-right populist projects mobilize emotions, identities, and moral boundaries through mimetic communication. And specifically in Latin America, where I had the opportunity to do field work during political campaigns. In the case of Brazil, I did for more than 10 years of research. In the case of Guatemala, Argentina, Uruguay, El Salvador, I did during 3 years of the postdoc. So let me start with the research questions. This research is guided by three central questions. First, how do memes and AI-generated images intervene in far-right populist discourse? I approach memes not as jokes, but as political artifacts that translate ideology into emotion, making complex arguments instantly legible. Second, what can we learn by comparing Brazil, Argentina, and El Salvador? That are the three case studies that I am proposing for the paper. These are different national contexts, of course, yet they share similar visual strategies for constructing the figure of the people and the figure of the internal enemy, internal of the country or of the nation. And third, how does humor become a mechanism of symbolic violence? Symbolic violence related and necessarily connected with the concept of populism that we are using. So much of what circulates as playful or ironic imagery actually contributes to a deep moralization of politics, normalizing hostility against women, LGBTQ plus communities, racialized groups, or political opponents. So that's the question, the third question that I have in the research. I will not enter a lot in the theoretical framework, as I think that we have a lot of presentations. Well, the two presentations that we're going to have that are going to speak a lot about the trajectories and the historical background that we are working. I just put a little in connection with memetic communication. So my work generally builds on different literature, combining post-colonial literature. We are speaking about Latin America, of course, visual analysis and political anthropology. I'm anthropologist and work in this intersection, visual communication and anthropology. And just to cite some of them, first, memes, I understand memes as cultural and affective artifacts. Memes condense meanings. That's something central. A single image, not just image, also a GIF or a video, short video, can carry an entire worldview. They are multimodal, intuitive, and emotionally charged. Second, I speak and use the literature on affective polarization. Authors such as Ahmed, for example, remind us that emotions do not simply accompany politics. They shape how people understand themselves and how they recognize others as threats or allies. So that's central to understand the power of memes. And third, memetic violence, a concept I use in my works to describe how humor, satire, and exaggeration work to legitimize aggression. Meaning memes are not marginal to contemporary populism, they are central to its affective power. Okay, so let me continue just speaking a little about the importance of generative AI and visual politics. The rapid spread of generative AI, like programs that we have seen in the last 2 years, Stable Diffusion, Midjourney, DALI, has transformed the memetic ecosystem. Before this was very different, it was like a manual production, and now we see all this new form of production of memetic communication. So these tools significantly lower the barriers of visual production. Supporters no longer need Photoshop or editing skills. Textual prompt can produce a polished image of Milei as a medieval crusader, Bolsonaro as a divine savior, or Bukele as a futuristic king. AI also makes it easier to fabricate imagined political realities like invented threats, hyperbolic heroism, or apocalyptic futures. Rather than diversifying the visual landscape, AI tends to reinforce authoritarian and nationalist narratives, giving them more aesthetic coherence and emotional force. That's central also to understand the power of AI generative images. So about the methodological approach, that's something that is pretty important in this research. This methodology combines digital ethnography, visual analysis, and physical fieldwork. I conducted systematic data collection in 6 open Telegram groups, 2 in each country, El Salvador, Argentina, and Brazil, gathering more than 25,000 images, both manual and AI generated. Okay, so, but equally important was the ethnographic immersion. I attended rallies, demonstrations, prior meetings, and political gatherings. What I observed repeatedly is that the memes circulating online were not abstract artifacts. They reappeared in chants, t-shirts, banners, and casual conversations. That's central. So this connection between on-screen imagery and street politics is essential. Memes do not stay online. They migrate, they sediment, and they reshape how people see their neighbors, their opponents, and their political choices. So that's a mixed, methodological approach. So I will just speak a little about one by one cases. So in the case of Argentina and Milei, in Argentina, Milei supporters construct a highly mythological visual world. Manual and AI generated memes depict Milei as a lion. Let me check. You can see there, like, the images of the lion hugging the flag, a crusader or a savior. National symbols are combined to portray him as the heroic figure who will rescue Argentina from the corrupt caste. Even with a relatively small percentage of AI use, the AI images are impactful. They create a polished mythology around Milei's leadership. That's pretty important, as this technology is like growing and developing very fast. So we will see in next political elections like new approaches about the way that mimetic communication is being produced. And offline also I heard like the same imagery repeated, like Milei, about Milei, like he will turn lambs into lions. He is the Templar who will save us. So memes in street discourse reinforce one another, turning Milei's anti-establishment message into a visual and emotional narrative of national salvation. That's the case of Argentina, of course, like a short resume. In the case of Brazil and Bolsonaro, that actually he's in jail from yesterday, so something to commemorate. Brazil shows a different pattern, very low AI use. Until now, I think that is going to change in the 2026 elections next year. But it's extremely intensive, the manual meme production. So it's a central code, communication code used during the elections. So here the dominant motifs are Christian morality, childhood innocence, and national purity. Bolsonaro appears embraced by Jesus. The Brazilian flag becomes a sacred symbol. Opponents like Lula that's the actual president from the Workers' Party, the PT, are represented as corrupt, dirty, or even monstrous. This moralization of politics is deeply effective, of course. So in Telegram groups, I analyze it, users routinely call for violence, saying things like a good bandit is a dead bandit, or he should be shot in the head when they are speaking about this kind of antagonism or enemies that they produce. And at the end, let me speak a little about the third case, El Salvador and Bukele. So El Salvador had the highest proportion of AI-generated images. Bukele is portrayed as a king, messiah, or futuristic national architect. That's actually something very important to put in connection with the futurism like that was established during the 20th fascism, but I will not speak about this connection now. So AI visuals present El Salvador as a country rising into modernity. gleaming skylines, military parades, smoothing lighting, and heroic body language. Manual memes, meanwhile, focus on delegitimizing journalists, feminists, NGOs, framing them as enemies of national security. And the ethnography revealed a clear cult of leadership. And supporters say things like, "He has saved us all. He's Jesus. He gave us back our country," and this kind of messages. Before the conclusions, and I think that's an important term, I would like to speak a little about mimetic violence, the K patterns. So across the three countries, several common patterns emerge. First, the moral binaries. Memes reduce politics to a struggle between good and evil. Second, humor as a tool of deshumanization. Jokes make violence appear harmless, even enjoyable. The pleasure of sharing a meme lowers critical defenses and also create like a collective identity. That's something pretty important. And third, the online-offline loop. Memes created in Telegram are repeated in rallies, and images from rallies become new memes. This recursive circulation blurs the boundary between digital propaganda and street mobilization. That's something pretty important methodologically speaking. So mimetic violence thus becomes a bridge between media ecosystems and political behavior. It organizes emotions and makes hostility seem common sense. And just to conclude my final remarks, let me highlight three broader implications that this research brings to populism studies. First, memes reshape how populist identities are constructed and lived. As I was speaking before, far-right movements in Latin America do not simply communicate through memes. Memes turn populist discourse into emotionally intuitive narratives where leaders appear as saviors, protectors, or divine figures, and opponents are transformed into dangerous others. For populism research, this means that affect, humor, and visual storytelling are not secondary to political ideology. They are constitutive elements of contemporary populist subjectivity. Second, generative AI amplifies the performative and aesthetic dimensions of populism. So that's central and will be central in the next elections. AI-generated images accelerate the heroic construction of leaders and the deshumanization of internal enemies. They provide far-right movements with a fast, cheap, and aesthetically cohesive repertoire for communicating moral binaries, nationalist imaginaries, and punitive fantasies. For scholars, this requires expanding populist theory to account for algorithmic aesthetics, automated propaganda, and new forms of digitally produced charisma. And to conclude, the third, ethnography and digital analysis must be brought together to fully grasp populist dynamics. That's my methodological contribution. One of the main contributions of this study is like observing rallies, demonstrations, and everyday interactions allowed me to see how memes circulate beyond screens, how chants, banners, and street-level performance replicate the same symbols, metaphors, and emotions. This online and offline feedback loop shows that mimetic communications actively shapes political behavior, not just representation. Populist studies need to account for this embodied circulation of affects and images if we want to understand how polarization becomes lived reality. So taken together, these findings suggest that mimetic communication, specifically when accelerated by generative AI, as we were explaining, constitutes a powerful infrastructure for producing the emotional landscapes through which far-right populism thrive. So thank you very much. I'm not sure for how long I was speaking. I hope it was like a good time.
It's a good time. Thank you very much,
Okay,
Gabriel. Thank you for
so
that
much.
excellent presentation and for opening up the visual and affective dimensions of contemporary populism. We now move from digital practices to the deeper conceptual history of the idea of the people. Our second presentation is by Maria Giorgia Carasini, who will discuss populism and the evolution of popular sovereignty. Maria, the floor is yours.
Many thanks for giving me the floor and, generally speaking, for this valuable opportunity to have a debate with you. So I'm sharing my screen because I have just some quotation to show. Okay, so can you see my slides? Okay, perfect. So coming to my presentation, as already been said, my approach is informed by the history of political thought. So I try to follow an approach which I would define as the history of ideas, consisting in situating the study of populism in the broader history of the modern concept of popular sovereignty in order to look for its theoretical and philosophical roots. So a first theoretical point to consider is that, a first theoretical point to consider when addressing the lack of a single shared definition of populism is the one highlighted by Yves Meny, that is the lack of a populism depends on the fundamental ambiguity of its main and final reference, that is the people, because it's a vague concept and consequently in democratic systems it's difficult to know who is the people and how it should exercise sovereignty. A very crucial theory concerning the people of populism to which we can refer to start this reflection is certainly that developed by Ernesto Laclau, that in search of a reason for populism states that the people are not a datum of the social structure, but rather a political category from which the very construction of the social derives. As we can see from this quotation, the nature of the people is that of an empty signifier, which can be filled by popular claims becoming an historical actor, in that from the consolidation of such claims in an equivalence chain derives the construction of a popular identity, full from an extensional point of view, but poor from an intentional point of view, because to gather together all these claims, it will have to deprive itself of particularistic contents. And according to Laclau, the path to hopefully follow in the operation of social construction would be the one just described. However, he knows that the matter is much more complex, since there is a further path which is also variable, that he defines as a logic of difference. And in this second case, the social construction derives from the affirmation of many particularities unable to join together in an equivalence chain, as we can see from this quotation. What I want to point out is that we can notice that the two logics possibly involved in the subjectivation process of the people identified in unpopulist reason are neither a strict Laclauian invention nor a specificity of the populist phenomenon. In fact, the alternative between equivalence logic that we could call monism and differential logic, let's say on the contrary, pluralism, dates back respectively to the theoretical contrast between the Rousseau political philosophy and the Madison perspective. So the first reflections on the modern concept of popular sovereignty. As is known, the very theorist of the popular sovereignty principle is Jean-Jacques Rousseau, who elaborates this concept by connecting it to that of general will. And in his perspective, the people are not the responsible for approving laws, are the only subject responsible for approving laws, and the law is the expression of the general will, a will not coinciding with the sum of everyone's will, that is the opinions of citizens observing political issues from their personal point of view, but with their overcoming, made it possible by the removal of subjective differences. The Rousseau position may appear naive. We might ask, is it possible that assembled individuals can always achieve the general will? Of course not. But Rousseau is aware of it, actually. In fact, the truly problematic assumption in his theory is that according to which, in case an agreement is not reached, the individuals in the minority will admit, or rather will be forced to admit, they were wrong, as we can see from the first quotation. So if at first one could believe that with the expression general will, Rousseau wanted to refer to the idea of unanimity, reading the second part of this brief passage from the social contract proves that actually the general will is the will of the majority that becomes general when even those in the minority forcibly conform to it, as they have previously signed the social contract through which they have ceded all their rights to the community, as we can see from the third quotation. On the contrary, the need to avoid this kind of upshot is the center of James Madison's concern that in the famous Federalist Stand addresses the issues of factions, which he defines as a group of citizens united by passion or interest in some ways in conflict with the right of other citizens. So look at the first quotation. Whereas in the second, we can see that Madison is convinced that the formation of factions is inevitable because people have different interests and different opinions, so there is no general will, and believes it is necessary to achieve a balance between popular government and the rights protection in order to avoid the slipping of the principle of popular sovereignty into tyranny of the majority, as we can see from the third quotation. Anyway, he adds that the factions are not so dangerous if they are in the minority, since in this case their wicked plans can be obstructed through the vote, whereas a real risk occurs when the majority is part of a faction. The matter is properly how to ensure individual rights, preserving at the same time the spirit and the form of popular government. So I would say that the distance separating Madison from Rousseau is evident. For Rousseau, the majority is authorized by contract to bring the recalcitrant minorities back into the ranks of the general will, whereas for Madison, it must be completely prevented that the majority can reach an agreement by carrying out oppressive measures. So what I want to point out is that with these reflections, Madison identifies ante litteram the eternal dilemma of modern popular regimes, that is the difficulty of combining the rule of majority with the need to recognize equal dignity to minorities. And this need, pointed out by Madison, was in fact implemented by the Constitution of the United States since the beginning, with the principle of the judicial review, because nothing guarantees the rightness of the majority decision. Think about, for example, that the 20th century totalitarianisms established themselves legally by obtaining the majority of votes in parliament because of the lack of a fundamental law superior to the parliament. So the lesson of the history was then received by the Second World War constitutionalism through the introduction of rigid constitutions and supervisory institutions. And the new constitutionalism provides for special procedures in the event of modification of the constitution. For example, I'm showing the Article 138 of the Italian constitution established the procedures for the constitutional modification. And the new constitutionalism established also the prohibition of modification in some cases. For example, the Article 139 of the Italian Constitution establishes the prohibition of revision of the Republican form. So said, modern constitutionalism established the sovereignty of the people, but simultaneously is established the existence of the two-level system, providing the subordination of the parliamentary law to the constitutional law, and archiving the idea of unlimited popular sovereignty as the foundation of political power. So the people are considered as the source of authority as well as the legitimacy of power, but the very exercise of power is considered as something different. It is in fact admitted only in the forms and limits provided by the Constitution. So if we follow the definition, for example, this on the slide is given by Nicola Matteucci, one of the most authoritative Italian constitutionalists. Constitutionalism can be generally defined as a legal technique through which citizens are ensured the exercise of their individual rights, and at the same time, the state is prevented from violating them. So constitutionalism paradoxically turns into a system in which minority are actually governing, since it is considered that at the base of the people power, there are equality and freedom of individuals, as well as the fundamental rights recognized to them act as a barrier to the abuse of the power of transient and prevaricating majorities. But the populist claims emerged since the 80s and 90s of the last century in response to the critical issues underlying the globalization process, aim at an alternative constitutional model, which fundamentally takes the form of the reproposal of a monist institutional perspective. Indeed, the tension between the rule of the majority and the fact of the constitutional minorities' protection can never be definitely overcome, as we noticed talking about Madison, and poses a permanent challenge to the system. And the exploitation of these criticalities allows today populism, advocate of a conception of popular sovereignty understood as the general will, to find the basis for their claims. So the impersonality of power is denounced as a stratagem designed to allow the minority of the population to dominate the majority, which instead irresistibly aspires to become the whole, as Rousseau teaches, and as Laclau reiterates. So populism require a dichotomous division of society into two fronts, one of which presents itself as part of the whole, states Laclau. So through this, the adoption of such a perspective, definable as pars pro toto, it is established an association between the majority and the true people. So the true people is the only legitimated to be sovereign, and consequently their representatives feel legitimized to push in the direction of a centralization of executive powers and to silence dissent on important political choices. But in this way, it is not supported the political priority of the will of the people, but once again, the supremacy of the will of the majority of the people over some of its part, and also against them, as stated by Nadia Urbinati, with the consequent shift of the principle of the majority existing in democracy in radical majoritarianisms. And there exist various studies concerning the action of populist-led executives, attesting how populism proposes to loosen the majority rule from any institutional constraints in order to achieve a fusion between the will of a part of the people and that of the state. So the common element among different cases studied can be defined, I would say, as a reformative hyperactivism consisting in the constant promotion of institutional and constitutional reforms in the attempt to occupy the institution and the state, as Jean-Werner Müller stated. And the empirical examples are really helpful from this point of view. So think about the case of Hungary, that's the most evident in Europe. But for example, nowadays in Italy, we are debating about the constitutional reform of the premiership. So Italy, of course, is a more mature democracy, but also this reform is presents problems from a constitutional point of view. And So these cases, of course, are different, but a comparison reveals a common trend. And this makes us think that although populist narratives are based on the identification of enemies not allowing the people to be sovereign, such as the elite outside the population, or enemies inside the population like the foreigners, the legitimate suspicion arising is that this operation is actually instrumental and serves to justify the pursuit of another goal, namely achieve an overturning of the procedures of liberal constitutionalism, the real enemy of populism and the real challenge of its agenda. So if we focus on neo-populism as it appears in contemporary Western democracy, it can be defined as a logic of the delegitimization of liberal constitutional democracy. However, my thesis is that this contrast between populism and constitutionalism depends on something structural with respect to the history of democratic politics and popular sovereignty, as I tried to explain. So, because the entire evolutionary history of this concept is pervaded by the never perfectly dialectizable aporia between singularity and plurality, between monism and pluralism. And consequently, we find the permanent presence of a tension between two needs, that of recognizing this principle and that of limiting it in order to avoid shifts. So coming to the conclusion, we can therefore ask ourselves, is populism a phenomenon produced by historical contingencies, or does it express a recurring manifestation of constitutive tensions of political modernity linked to the very concept of popular sovereignty? As can easily be deduced, I favor the latter interpretation, but I do not entirely exclude the former. Therefore, the hypothesis I assume here is that populism is not merely the outcome of specific dynamics in current socio-political affairs, even though I recognize that circumstantial conjunctures provoke a reactivation of the aporias already inscribed in the modern category of popular sovereignty. So, to properly understand the phenomenon, it is therefore necessary to develop a double-level investigation. On the one hand, there is the need to genealogically investigate the history of the concept of popular sovereignty, thus demonstrating how its original ambivalences return to produce concrete political effects within contemporary democracy. And on the other hand, it is necessary to ask what conditions trigger the outbreak of a populist wave, what leads people to support a certain type of politics, and what this entails for the transformation of the concept and practices of popular sovereignty. And this is the goal I set for my future studies. So thanks for your attention.
Thank you very much, Maria, for that insightful and historically grounded presentation. We will now move to our last presentation by Elif Bagsak-Ordem, titled Beyond Fairness, Meritocracy, the Limit of Representation, and the Politics of Populism. Elif, the floor is yours.
Hi, I'm Elif Bagsak-Ordem. I'm a PhD candidate in political science at the Loughborough University. Thank you for inviting or accepting our papers. This is very exciting for me. My dissertation is an empirical analysis of 29 Western liberal democracies. I'm looking at how people perceive meritocratic ordering, how this shapes their subjective social status, and how this relates to support for populist alternatives. However, I found the existing theoretical landscape insufficient for this task. This paper develops the conceptual tools I needed to understand when meritocracy shifts from fairness ideal to a generator of political mixed recognition. We face an epistemological problem in the literature of populism. A big part of populism research treats populism as a thin ideology or as an irrational deviation from democratic norms. This perspective, according to Laclau, caused by a belief in a certain rational form of politics. At the same time, empirical work increasingly shows that it is not just unemployment or low income, but declining subjective social status is the better predictor of the support for populist parties. Explanations include cultural consequences of neoliberal restructuring or rising status of anxiety, but these do not fully explain why grievances flow through populist channels rather than traditional left parties. Recently, Sandel and others point to meritocracy as the missing piece. However, what we lack is a precise mechanism explaining how a system of fair sorting turns into a populist rage. To get there, I argue we must shift our ontological stance, treat populism not as a deviation, but as a political logic. This is where Laclau comes in. For Laclau, populism is not an ideology with a fixed program, but a way of constructing the political. He asks, why can some political alternatives or aims be expressed only through populist means? Laclau explains that populism arises when series of particular social demands are not absorbed by existing institutions. Therefore, a minimal unit of analysis for him is not group, it is the social demand itself. In a stable institutional order, social demands are handled differentially. When a demand is met, it disappears. When a demand is ignored, it becomes an unmet demand. If institutions lose their capacity to absorb demands due to a hegemonic crisis, unmet demands begin to accumulate. They share not a common content, but a common blockage. At this point, they start to link together in an equivalential chain. This chain eventually needs a name, a signifier that can stand in for all its parts. That signifier becomes something like the people. A wage worker's economic complaint and a rural citizen's cultural complaint can be bound together through a broad signifiers like justice, change, or simply the people. So Laclau gives us the form of the rupture, but he does not specify the content. What exactly is blocking demands today? To answer that, I turn to Nancy Fraser. Fraser defines justice as participatory. Could you see my? Okay. Fraser defines justice as a participatory parity. To have it, social arrangements should allow all adult members of society to interact with one another as peers. Achieving this requires three mutually constitutive conditions. First one is objective condition, namely the redistribution. According to this, material resources must be distributed so that people have the independence and voice needed to participate as equals. Parity is blocked when economic structures, the division of labor, property regimes, welfare systems, deny certain groups the objective conditions to interact as peers. Traditional left politics of equality operate here. Justice requires that material resources be allocated so that all citizens can participate as equals. Second one is the intersubjective condition, which is recognition. According to this, institutionalized patterns of cultural value must express equal respect and offer equal chances for social esteem. This addresses the dimension of misrecognition. Usually this is in form of sexism, racism, or caste oppression. In Fraser's terms, misrecognition is not just about hurt feelings, but a status injury due to institutionalized hierarchies of respect that deny some people from equal standing. Third one is the political condition, which is representation. It is about the framing of who counts as a member and how decisions are taken must be fair and inclusive. Parity is impossible when political boundaries and procedures disenfranchise or silence certain groups. Crucially, these dimensions intertwine. An issue can be simultaneously about redistribution, recognition, and representation. Fraser is helpful because she refuses the usual choice between economic and cultural explanation. My theoretical innovation is to read meritocracy through this tripartite lens. I argue that neoliberal articulation of meritocracy is the specific hegemonic discourse that generates failures in all three dimensions, creating the exact unmet demands Laclau predicts. Meritocracy is the principle that social rewards, jobs, income, status should be allocated based on individual merit. Coined ironically by Michael Young in 1958 as a satire, it has become a core democratic ideal. Since 1990s, meritocracy has functioned as a central fairness story of liberal democracies. It promises equal opportunity, efficient sorting, and rule by competence. But empirically, educational attainment remains strongly correlated with social background, and selection systems remain stratified. Education is the classic side of this paradox, as to equalize opportunities and sort individuals at the same time. And this is an impossible task. My claim is that under a neoliberal articulation, meritocracy becomes a regime of justification that fails on all three of Fraser's dimensions. In redistribution failure, it launders privilege as merit. In recognition failure, it sends the message that those at the bottom deserve their status, and that's rational. And in the representation failure, it justifies technocratic closure and hollowing out the democratic voice. The first one is redistribution. Here I draw on Claire Chambers' critique of moment of equal opportunity. The moment of equal opportunity is the idea that if we level the playing field once, for example, through a fair university exam, then all subsequent inequalities are legitimate. Chambers illustrates this with the story of Jeremy and Jason, two students with similar ability diverge after one narrowly enters an elite pipeline. Early procedural differences compound into lifelong advantage. The system rewards the advantages it helped to create. In real world, education systems reflect in this academic and vocational tracking systems. Comparative research shows stratified education systems amplify background inequalities. The system justifies this with efficiency arguments, but the effect is to lock in disadvantage and treat it as an outcome of a fair procedure. The key point here is redistribution failure stems from how the system defines merit, not simply from just insufficient welfare. The second failure is recognition, and this is where my main conceptual contribution lies: epistemic recognition, misrecognition. Meritocracy claims to be a rational, objective sorting mechanism that identifies latent traits of intelligence, talent, and effort. But in practice, it privileges specific middle-class cultural repertoires as if they were neutral indicators of ability. It is not unseen disadvantages due to upbringing or ability, rather how we attach worth and value through one set of rationality. Annette Leroux identifies two distinct cultural repertoires of child-rearing, deeply divided by class. Through her work, we can see how institutions valorize concerted cultivation, which is the middle-class parenting style that trains children to negotiate, question, and manage institutions. This fosters a sense of entitlement that is seamlessly rewarded by dominant institutions. These behaviors are read by schools and employers as sign of talent and motivation. In contrast, working class accomplishment of natural growth practices foster autonomy and rich kin ties, but in institutional settings, they appear as difference and they create a sense of constraint in the children. Their difference and lack of intervention are interpreted by the institution not as different, valid cultural logic, but as a deficit, as a lack of talent, parental care, or a lack of rationality. Under neoliberal meritocracy, this becomes a specific status injury in the domain of knowledge and credibility, which is I name as epistemic misrecognition. This concept goes deeper than simple cultural marginalization. It targets the capacity for reason itself. This recognition failure feeds directly into redistribution. If only certain forms of knowledge are recognized as merit, then only those are rewarded in the labor markets. Other forms of work and understanding, such as care, manual labor, community knowledge, are systematically undervalued. The failure of recognition thus serves as an engine for the failure of redistribution. The cultural devaluation of working class knowledge justifies their economic exploitation, creating a feedback loop where material poverty is taken as proof of cultural inferiority. And also their claims are coded as irrational, emotional, or uninformed. This makes it difficult to voice grievances within the dominant political grammar at all. This is crucial for connecting meritocracy to populism. The third failure is the representation. If merit is equated with expertise, then broad democracy easily appears as a threat to efficiency. As Hopkin and Blight show, core economic decisions in Europe have been insulated from democratic contestation. These are framed as technical necessities rather than political choices. Key economic decisions are insulated from democratic scrutiny to ensure stability. For those already suffering maldistribution and epistemic misrecognition, this produced a final exclusion. They lack political channels to express their grievances. Only those recognized as competent experts are treated as legitimate participants. At this point, three failures come together. Maldistribution denies material security, epistemic misrecognition denies standing as rational movers, misrepresentation denies channels of political voice. Neoliberal meritocracy generates unmet demands that are about dignity, status, and intelligibility as much as about income. The system cannot hear these demands because acknowledging them would undermine its own fairness narrative. So they are classified as irrational, as resentment, envy, or populist anger. Excluded from formal politics, these demands cannot be managed differentially. They accumulate and begin to link together, not because they share an identical context, but because they share common experience of exclusion structured by the three failures. This is what exactly Laclau describes as a set of unmet demands that, finding no place within existing institutional language, form an equivalential chain and crystallize around an empty signifier, which is the people. This gives, in this sense, populism is the symptomatic return of the political that meritocracy tried to suppress. It is a rational response to being told one's suffering is both deserved and unintelligible. So the paper makes three main moves. It reframes contemporary populism not as a deviation from rational democratic norms, but as a symptom of how neoliberal meritocracy closes down the space of legitimate grievances. It introduces epistemic misrecognition, and it builds a theoretical bridge between Fraser's framework of justice and Laclau's account of populist construction, providing a language to discuss meritocracy and populism together. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Elif, for the rich and thought-provoking presentations. We will now turn to our discussant. We'll begin with Dr. Sanuvan Austin, followed by Dr. Thibault Dauphin.
Hi, thanks so much for letting me discuss these three amazing papers that I really enjoyed learning more about. I think all three of you are really on top of what is happening right now and on top of the literature and really cutting edge. So I want to compliment all three of you on the papers that you've just presented. And I feel really lucky that we were able to see all these papers and to hear your work. So thank you very much for these presentations. I'm going to start with some questions for Gabrielle. I really enjoyed your presentation, and I really like how you show how memes or videos, or they're not jokes, but they're really not just jokes, but they're just really artifacts making complexities understandable, instantly understandable. And it also really reminds me, especially like your link from having no skills needed to having from having skills needed. So like at first you had to be able to work with Photoshop, and now with AI, you don't have to anymore. It really like made me think a step before that as well, because I think the memes that you are now showing are very similar to the cartoons that we've had for centuries, like the political commentary that we've had for centuries. And I really enjoy looking at cartoons from history to kind of understand all the nuances. And it also makes you realize that in cartoons, you really have to have a lot of knowledge about like a large cultural repertoire to be able to understand them. And the same applies to the memes that you've been showing in your presentation and your paper. And I'm really curious, since like cartoons from the past are still interpreted so often and are still used as examples, I'm thinking that these memes that you've been showing will be seen in that way in the future as well. So I'd really like to invite you to reflect on how you think history will interpret the memes. So which in which broader picture will they place them, and to what extent will people understand them or not understand them? And I'm also very curious to hear your ideas about how you think that this democratization of meme making, how this really how this changes the scene. So now I think anyone can hop on AI and make an image and kind of adjust it a bit. But in the past, you needed Photoshop skills, and in the past before that, you needed to have an entry and a place to put your cartoons in a newspaper to become in any way well known. So this democratization, I'm curious to hear which impact that has, and maybe it has actually very little impact. I think that's also really a possibility. And I'm also wanted to ask some questions about your country comparison. So the three countries that you present have like a different level of immersion of AI. And I'm really curious to hear why you think that is. So why did Brazil not have a lot of AI created images, whereas El Salvador had the most, and Argentina, I think, was kind of in the middle. In theory, all three should have the same. So I'm really curious, like, why is there this difference? Does it say anything about the forums that you were in, or does it say something about the differences between the countries? And I'm really curious to hear what you think. I'd also want to know more about who are the makers of these memes. Are these, well, anyway, I'm from the Netherlands, and there's this, turned out that a big Facebook group where a lot of memes were being shared, AI-generated memes, were actually from members of parliament from a populist radical right party that were leading it. And that was quite interesting, I think, because I think we often assume that these are just lonesome people in their attics, but these are actually already powerful people who were maybe also in their attics, but making all these images. And in some way, all the prompts that they used had come out, and people could read exactly how they made these images. Like they would say things like, show a white family who can't find a house because immigrants live in their house. And then they said, like, make the family whiter, make the girl hotter, all these things. So this is exactly how they came to those images. And I was wondering whether you know anything about who makes them and how they made them. So thank you very much. Then I'd like to move on to the next presentation by Maria. And I'd like to say, like, I very much enjoyed your presentation and the way that you brought everything together, all these different thinkers together, from Ernesto Laclau to Jean-Jacques Rousseau, James Madison. I think is a really good theoretical framework to understand what's going on with, well, this rather narrow conception of democracy, that with the majority being the true people. And I really like how you framed it in this way. I'd also want to know more. I'm really curious about what exactly is wrong with this rule of the majority, because you lay out very well that this is really a majority conception of who the people are, and what really is wrong with this. And what I would like to invite you to think a little bit about is, like, what are we really missing when we are just looking at the majority? What are minority voices that are being unheard, and what is really the problem with this? And what I also would like to stress is that, if you think about identity in an intersectional way, actually you can conclude that almost everyone is a minority in some way. Everyone has a way in which they are part of a marginalized group. So it could be maybe a white male could still be less educated, or could be have special educational needs or some kind of disability that also makes them a minority. So with minority rights, I think it's just really important to understand that this really isn't that it only comprises a small group, but it actually comprises a very, very large group, namely almost everyone is a minority in some way. And I'd also like to kind of ask you to reflect a little bit, like, if you look at it in a different way. I think the reason why this populism and majority rule is so this idea of majority rule is so prevalent on the right of the political spectrum is that they're actually trying to marry some deeply unpopular notions with majority rule. So on the one hand, there's on the right, you have more of people standing up for big business, which is really not in the to the benefits of the majority, and there are a lot of business interests being represented on the right. But then the right is also the side of the political spectrum that's really saying, well, we are standing up for the majority, and especially we are standing up for the white majority, and because this is the way in which they can claim to speak for the people, even though the economic policies that they're furthering really are not to the benefit of the larger majority. So I think this might be a way to think about it, to kind of show how important it is what you're doing, because what you're doing is really very, very good. Okay, then I'd like to move on to the paper by Elif. And I really enjoyed your paper as well. I really enjoyed your tripartite lens that you used, because I really think that this helped us understand what you were discussing so much more. And I really liked your ideas about meritocracy and about how it really amplifies class that's already there, and how it's easier for some to be successful than for others. And also based on this cultural repertoire of parenting, that certain forms of merit are cultivated more in certain classes and are also valued more by society. And especially this became so unbelievably apparent during the COVID crisis, where you had professions that were seen as essential and not so essential, and it wasn't the most high-paying jobs that were always the essential jobs, and that really showed, like, who do we need in our society and who do we not need. And I was reminded of this the other day, that a neighbor of mine said to me, like, I actually don't know what work you do. I only remember that during COVID, you said it was very unessential. And this is indeed, I really thought this was such so important to remember. And it was really such a good reminder that a lot of this work that's really not that is appreciated by society, because we've got nice work as academics. Really, when push comes to shove, art isn't the thing that we really need for our day-to-day survival. Anyway, so you were discussing, like, a question that I want to ask you is, because you were kind of assuming that with this form of misrecognition, is that this is a kind of status injury, and that it especially it takes place when people do not see their ideas or the political parties that they vote for represented in formal politics. But more and more often, we actually do see populist radical right parties in politics. And I'd really like to invite you to reflect on how, or to maybe empirically check out, or there are some papers on this as well, like what happens when this does happen, because there are cases where this does happen, like maybe Italy, there's definitely populist radical right representation in government. In the Netherlands, where I'm from, this is also definitely the case. So what happens when these previously marginalized voices do become represented and actually enter government bodies? How does this change people's ideas of misrecognition? Or maybe how does it not change people's ideas? I think that's actually more likely that it doesn't really change people's ideas of misrecognition, but I think it's important to reflect on this anyway. And I really like your reflections on the neoliberal side of explanations of populism, and that it's really like, an idea that people feel like they are being left out and they're left behind. And with this, I really like the more recent work by Catharina de Vries, and her work is very really looks at what happens and has a really nice quasi-experimental framework, methodology, in which they check whether the people who really have been experiencing public service deprivation in their local area, so there's just less government resources being spent in their area, how they are more likely to develop and develop populist radical right conceptions and attitudes and vote for populist radical right parties. And she measures this in different ways, with like public service deprivation in Italy, or access to healthcare in the United Kingdom, and finds the same thing, is that these really tangible changes in the access to government that people get really changes their ideas and their voting behavior. And I think this really amplifies the point that you're already making. And I invite you to think about this a little bit more and to reflect on this more in your paper. And yeah, otherwise, thanks very much.
Should I start? Thank you so much, San. I have written a lot of notes from not just from my presentation, but also from the other presentations that you. It was great. Okay, let me try just to organize my mind a little. About the cartoons that you were asking. I am actually now in a process applying for a grant with the British Library to check how what kind of categories we could find during like the last two secules of cartoons that they have in the collection. So I'm trying to actually construct this kind of bridges from elements, aesthetical elements, but also like meaningful elements to understand how racism, for example, was construed by images in Latin America, and all the enemies that nowadays far right in Latin America are construing. At the same time that I'm applying for this grant, I am not so much sure about how easy is to detect those like connections, like based in a kind of post-colonial approach. I think that there are like a lot of elements that are like intertwined. So I'm not sure about actually how methodologically create those bridges from the past to the present. I think that it will be very um, simple, just like to try to organize these connections in a line. So I'm trying to think more about this, but thank you so much to speak about this. I have done like more work about, for example, the connections of far right leaders in Latin America, but not just in Latin America, with the 20th century images based on Marvel and DC heroes. And speaking about how like far right leaders are using some elements and embodying some elements from those leaders from Marvel and DC. And it was easier because it's like just like 50 years ago, and I found a lot of elements to connect this. But I really appreciate this, and I'm thinking about this a lot. What more things you were speaking about? Yeah, about those images. Those images have maybe I didn't speak or I didn't speak a lot in the presentation, but one of the main things that create this collective identity in the mimetic communication is the possibility to contribute in the image. So the image maybe is created by one person, but you can add, like a gun, or you can add, like a different clothes, or you can change the color. So it's a kind of composition, and in this composition is part of this magical logic that we find in the manual production. In the AI production is different because again. I say again because I was thinking that with historical comics and cartoons was also like one creator. Now again we have like with the prompts one creator creating those images, as they just say, okay, please, I would like to see Jair Bolsonaro in jail, or I would like to see Lula da Silva like as an evil with two horns and whatever, and the image is going to be produced. So again we are going to individualize more the way that we produce mimetic communication with the generative AI. More things about the different uses about AI in those cases of these different countries. Actually, I think that well, there are like different regulations. In the case of Brazil, for example, where I'm located now until January, in the case of Brazil, there is a kind of expert commission that is working with the government just to try to regulate how AI generative images and videos are being produced. I think that they are thinking about the elections of the next year and all the difficulties that they can find in this moment of instability. So that's one of the things, the regulation. But the other thing is the times of doing the field work and extracting the data. If you, for example, follow one election in June, another election in September, just in 3 months, you are going to have new technology that is going to change the habits and uses that people are yeah are using, in the digital sphere. So that's something really really fast, and I think that's like central to understand the differences about the uses in each country. And yeah, just for not to having like a lot of time with this, about the makers, we have like different profiles, like from this guy that is like angry with corruption and decides to enter in a group and create a meme and put it like in the ecosystem, people that of course are working like a kind of far right digital activists that have like this kind of strategy is an mimetic communication is a strategy, so is organized trolls and like different profiles that create this as a whole. So thank you so much for all the points. I really appreciate.
Thank you very
that's
much,
all.
Gabriel. And now we can have Maria to respond.
So many thanks, first of all, for all the insightful advice and all the insightful comments. So I'll try to reply. So when I talk about the majority, my reference is mainly the idea of a political majority and of a parliamentary majority. So I strictly connect this concept to the political framework. And what is wrong in that? In my opinion, the main problem is that a majority that can exercise its power without constraints is dangerous not only for institutions and for minorities, but also for itself. First of all, because majorities are always transient. So whoever is part of a political majority today will be in the minority tomorrow. And but then I believe we must also consider that we are in representative democracies, and given the absence of an imperative mandate, if the representatives of a political majority can exercise their power without constraints, it is the members of the people themselves who are in danger. So actually, I believe that the constitutional constraints are a guarantee for the majority itself, for the majority as well. But maybe this conception is unpopular, as it was said, because maybe the most widespread ideas about our institutions, if we consider a popular framework, are very different from our ideas. Maybe the people have less sophisticated ideas of institutions, of the functioning of institutions. So sometimes people don't accept this kind of constraints because they believe it is a limitation of their sovereignty. So in my opinion, the real problem is a cultural problem, and is a lack of knowledge among the people about the really functioning of institutions and the really guarantees that this kind of systems provide. But I don't have a solution about this problem. Maybe is a problem that it's very difficult to overcome. But as I said before, maybe this kind of not satisfaction reemerges every time that the conjunctures get the people not satisfied about their economic status, about the international politics, and so on. So I don't know if my question is acceptable. Many thanks.
Thank you very much, Maria. And next is Elif. You have 5 minutes to respond.
Thank you. Thank you, Sanne, for your question. When I engage more and more, I realized actually what I'm doing is also investigating class under the recognition lens. And what I mean by misrecognition or representation in that sense is more about, I think, like moral equality in the society, and it's about changing values regarding what Sandal calls as dignity of labor, as you said, give example from the COVID times. And this has changed very rapidly, and it will continue to change with new technological developments. But what are you asking about? What you are asking about? What happens after populism becomes widespread? This is also kind of relates what Gabriel is doing because Laclau explains actually this representation as a double movement from representative to represented, and also from represented to representative. And when the political field is left alone, these populist figures who somehow become popular identities, they have power to influence the represented, even their needs, even their demands. Like they have power to frame their demands. But this is a different perspective than just calling them as irrational. This, when we all always talk about how media is important, how technology is important, and I think in my own perspective, we all, or people who don't want to see this right-wing populism more and more, need to engage more with class and status in that sense. And our political parties need to engage with them more and more. And that kind of rhetoric needs to be more popular than just always saying, oh, populism is horrible and like we are all doomed. This is also kind of a populist logic in that sense, or discourse in my perspective. And I don't know if I could answer your question. Well, it's just, I know this is just a draft and I want to clarify my concept of epistemic misrecognition in the future. So thank you for your question. It was very helpful.
Thank you. Thanks all three.
Yeah, thank you very much, everyone. Now we can open the floor for questions from audience, and we can have an open discussion. And we have time to do that for 20 minutes, and then after that is the closing remark. It's not more of, is there anybody who wants to ask questions and or elaborate? Anybody from the speakers and from our discussant, Dr. Thibault, he's not here. There's an emergency that happened to him recently, so we have more time to ask and clarify and to ask questions, engage more. Probably I can start. Gabriel, your paper reminds me of my paper when I was a graduate student at Indiana University in Bloomington, and it's my comprehensive exam in my cultural criminology class. So what I did, I collected caricatures of how United States caricatured the Filipino people during the colonization. And during that time when the United States colonized the Philippines, the only way to communicate the colonization to the Filipino people and to the American public is through caricature, because there's no radio and television back then. And the way they caricature, and then these are savage images, the othering of Filipinos, the way they did it, it's always supporting the agenda, the project of colonization by the state. So it's controlled by the state. It's controlled by the media. Unlike now, whoever have access to AI can generate an images that distort the identity not only of ordinary people, especially of the powerful, of the politicians, of Trump, and any populist leader can be distorted. So for me, your paper is really important because it communicates how memes democratize the othering, right? The distortion, to create not only the othering but to criticize and distort the identity of the powerful. So that's really important for me, and for if your paper reminds me of my paper too. I wrote a paper and the title is Criminal Populism. Criminal populism is the opposite of a penal populism, because in a penal populism, the politicians criminalize the crime of the others, of the lower class, of the immigrant, like it's all about, penal populism is about crime warrior politicians, like crime against, war against illegal immigrants, war against drugs, war against terrorism. So it's all about the others. So in criminal populism, they capitalize their own crime. Like Trump, right after his mugshot photo, he raised millions of dollars using that mugshot photo alone. And every court appearance is like a campaign. They use the criminal justice processes to capitalize their own crime. So in that way, for me, Trump is also a product of epistemic misrecognition. He is representing that epistemic recognition. He is capturing the identity of the marginalized. So what, I am right? Is that right, Elif? Um, I can give you time to respond, Gabriel or Elif.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Gabriel, if you want to.
Thank you so much, Chris. I will read your paper. I think it is looks very interesting. I Yeah, I agree about the idea about the importance that the AI is creating about the democratization of the possibility of the distortion. Is a kind of symbolic violence that well, not just symbolic, but yeah, it's like different kind of violence that are normalized and facilitated by the AI. And I am sure that we have to work more about those kind of stereotypes and ideas that are being normalized. Through humor, we are normalizing some social norms. Firstly, you can see like people saying, okay, that's funny. For example, speaking, like bad about black people looks funny in the in this meme. And after this, you have like racial politics or racial politics, not racist policies, right? Like, I mean, like the humor and the memes are, like a way to start to normalize some discourses that at the end, can have space, in the public policies and also in the comprehension that from those groups like far right collectives and whatever they are using, So thank you for your comment. Is very good.
Yeah, thank you, Gabriel. Elif?
Thank you, Chris. I think more than Trump is capturing the epistemic misrecognition in there, like he is capturing, and he is an answer to this powerlessness. Or maybe that was my initial starting point, but I changed it so you wouldn't be finding it in the draft. I thought if people unhappy about these things happening, why they would support people like very different from them, who are very rich, very entitled, and maybe then I thought like this probably is not about who is there, it's about being able to affect the politics, and being like the power comes from being crowded maybe. But I didn't reflect this on the paper. Why I'm now telling this is that I don't think Trump captures the misrecognition. He uses it, but there are certain examples. For example, when I mentioned about this democratic hollowing out the technocracy of the European Union, it's not that I'm supporting the Brexit, but during the Brexit, there were some claims could be made maybe in terms of not being able to affect the certain economic policies. But this technocratic ideal of governance is creating so much hegemony. You can't discuss this in a rational person. And this has been capitalized by other populist figures later on. So what kind of political discussions could be made where creates a problem for people to reflect their ideas. And sometimes these are simple ideas that feels like very wrong, but if you don't engage with them, they find their outcomes and representations like Trump. That was something that I would like to say with misrecognition.
For Maria, the people, especially the political majority, they are powerful to mobilize supporters for a populist leader, and they can make their populist leader win in election. Again, like Trump or like Rodrigo Duterte in the Philippines. But once that politicians, populist leader like Trump, win, there's also a regret among them, like when Hispanic, for example, voted for Trump, majority of them voted for Trump. When the deportation started, you started seeing lots of videos and interviews that they regretted voting for Trump, And the same thing with in the Philippines, for example, people voted for Duterte, and then Duterte started killing them. They even killed people who have wearing T-shirt "I love Duterte" or have a badge of Duterte. That I voted for you. Why are you raiding my home? Like using your framework of the people, your concept of your paper. How do you explain that? Have you think about it? Once the political majority, political majority not always represent the collective basic need. There's always like a transition for regret. Like why they voted for them. But during the campaign, it's always about like a celebration. It's all about support, and then once that representative win, there's always like a regret. There's always about remorse. Like how you think about that stage?
Many thanks for this intriguing question. So about the regret of the people, I believe that it's a very complicated matter because, for example, if we think about the United States, people regretted after the first Trump election, regretted to had voted for Trump, but then they elected him again.
Again, that's right.
So it's really complicated to understand why. I believe that maybe according to my framework, the real problem is what a president, in this case Trump, can achieve during his mandate. If what he achieves it's something that breaks the balance between the institutions or not, or so it means that if the people regrets and then elects another president, if the situation can be recovered or not. Probably the presidential systems, from this point of view, run more risks because in the European parliamentary systems, there's less polarization, and the parliamentary decisions are much more have much more constraints. I don't know, as concerned the American situation, I believe that it's something that's really difficult to explain as concerned the new election of Trump. So maybe we have to wait the end of his mandate in order to have an idea about the impact and about the effect of the checks and balances of the constitutional democracy of the United States.
Yeah, the check and balances during this time totally disappear. There's no more, because he can control the court system. He can remove judges. You know, he's really pushing the limit of the American democracy.
Yeah.
So, you know, United States is a two-party system. There's no pluralist, like what you said in your paper, you know, but
Yeah.
still the political majority decide. They have swing state, they have fixed state, you know, like whatever will happen, they will vote for Democrats. There's some state, whatever happen, whoever running, they're gonna vote as a Republican, and that's it. You know, just the Democrats and a Republican. But there's some swing state, you know, probably the swing state. It's gonna be, and they put lots of resources to campaign in the swing state, like Pennsylvania, where I live. It's a swing state, you know. But again, there's always a point that this political majority, this populist vote, there's always, you know, a stage that they get remorse, and you know, it kind of a pseudo-masochist type of thing. So I think, is there any last word from you, Dr. Kenneth, or anybody from
Actually,
the
the
audience?
last word would belong to Reka, but I
Reka,
just
okay.
make a suggestion for Elif Başak about her article. When she delivered her presentation, I got a perception that we can understood merit as a privilege, actually, as a part of meritocracy, and the privilege and the merit is not just based on achieved success, but generally it's a hereditary success. So I have a humble suggestion whether she could consider to add as a third aspect by basing on theory of justice of John Rawls, especially his theory or experimental social experimental concept called as wheel of ignorance to her analysis. because the meritocracy is just not based on achieved success. The original positions also so important when she is reminded us that the classes is important. This meritocracy also very closely related to the classes. So the underprivileged groups maybe have much more talents, but they have no opportunity, equal opportunity to gain the same merits to compete with the others, the more privileged groups. So I just suggest her to look at John Rawls' theory of justice to make some analysis for her almost perfect article. Thank you. And now the Reka will say something.
Can I make a comment? I'm
Yeah.
actually engaging largely in my paper with Rawls's ideas. They weren't in the presentation, but they are in the paper. So.
Okay, it's good to hear.
Thank you.
Thank you. Reka?
Yeah, Reka, go ahead. And LF, I did read your Rawls theory of justice in your paper. I also like how you discuss the concept of parity. Go ahead, Reka.
Thank you. So I would just like to say the closing remarks on behalf of ECPS and thank our distinguished presenters for your insightful and thought-provoking contributions. I would also like to express our gratitude to our discussant for her precise and illuminating assessments. And dear attendees, thank you for engaging, and we warmly invite you to join for the next ECPS virtual workshop on the 11th of December, where the session will explore fractured democracies, rhetoric, repression, and the populist turn. We encourage you to register and take part in this important conversation, and I wish you all a wonderful rest of the day.